What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and I am here back on the Fanalytics channel once again for another great top 10 video. In this one, we are doing the top 10 Bronze Age keys. If you came over from my channel, we covered 10 through 6 on that video, and we're going to do 5 through 1 on this video. Now, I did also promise that we've got a giveaway as part of this. That giveaway is Tales of Suspense number 58. It's got a piece out of the corner down here, but still a nice presenting copy. Otherwise, great colors and everything. That iconic cover with Captain America fighting Iron Man. If you want a chance to win this book, you have got to like the video, subscribe to this channel, the Fanalytics channel, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment with hashtag Fanalytics. I will pick a winner in the future, and I will send that book out to you. Now, just remember, in case there's anybody that's trying to scam anyone in the comments, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a comment for you to reach out to me on Instagram, and that is where I will get your shipping information, everything like that, and send it to you. I cover all the shipping, all of that. Don't worry about it. So no one should be asking you for money. So if someone's asking you for money, it's a scam. It did not come from me. All right, so now let's get into a little bit more on these books. So like I said, we covered 10 through 6 in my video. We're doing 5 through 1 in this video. If you watch some of my other videos where I did the top 10 Silver Age books, top 10 Amazing Spider-Man books, very similar content here. We're gonna be looking at those top 10 Bronze Age keys and which ones really look like you might want to be picking them up right now, if they're maybe a little undervalued even, safe buys, which ones you might want to wait a little bit, just wait and see what's going to happen, and which ones you just want to avoid for now to stay away from. At the end of this video, I'm going to consolidate everything together from my video and this one, so let's get into these books. All right, so let's get into these books. If you haven't watched the first half of this video on my channel, don't worry, you can still enjoy this one here. Like I said earlier, we're going to go over all of the results combined at the end of this one as well. You can see there is a good amount of information on this screen here. We've got some CGC census data. We've got the grade there. What that is the most common grade for this book. So I like to pick the most common grade because it gives me the most sales data, because it's more likely to sell regularly, that I can use for these evaluations of these books. Then on the bottom there, I have the current price, what you call the fair market value, what this book is going for right now. Then I have the return on that book prior to the comic boom. What I'm doing is I'm looking at what these books were doing before we had those big spikes in prices, using that information to get what these books were returning before the comic boom happened, to then estimate what the price might be today, like that spike had never happened. Then I'm comparing those estimated values to what it's going for right now to see if maybe it's undervalued, overvalued, or valued fairly. So let's talk about this book here. We've got Iron Man number 55. This is a multi-key book. You've got first appearance of Thanos, first appearance of Drax. You also have the first appearance of Star Fox. That's one of the more important things going on right now, because he has a potential role, or had a role, in the MCU, but it was in the Eternals, which doesn't really help things very much. But Thanos is really the big character for this. He's one of the biggest villains in the Marvel Universe. See here in this book, the most common grade is an 8.5. There are quite a few copies of this book on census, and that's partly because it has so much value in any grade. It has 5,784 total copies with 4,904 universals. And in the 8.5 alone, there are 580 copies with 505 universals. Now, at the 8.5 price point, this book is currently going for about $1,050. Now, I had to use 2 different time periods for this book. The reason is that from 2015 to 2020, this book didn't change in price. It kind of went up a little bit, went down a little bit, and so it really had a 0% return. But from 2004 to 2009, before the MCU, that's why I picked that time frame, it had a 10% return. And so what I decided to do is I just gave a range for this book. So this book was going for about $825 in June of 2020. If I apply those returns, we're obviously still at $825 with a 0% return, up to $1,100. So we have a range that goes from where you could be down 21%, or you could actually have it undervalued a bit at 5%. So this is a book that I think could be interesting to be buying right now. I think the risk is pretty low if you were going to buy this book. There is some potential for downside risk. I really don't think that this is a 0% return book. I think it's probably closer to that 10% long term. So I do think this one is relatively safe right now. In an 8.5, this book did peak at $2,400 in 2022. It's down 56%. I do think this book has overcorrected some, probably just a reaction to Thanos no longer being in the MCU. But to me, this is a great book, even though he's not on the cover, and one that the risk is relatively low right now with it, in my opinion. All right, let's move on to number 4. Number 4, we have got Marvel Spotlight, number 5. First appearance of Ghost Rider, very popular character, very rare and high grades. And that is going to be part of the reason for some of these unique prices, I think, with this book. Now, the most common grade for this book is a 7.0, 5,694 total copies on census with 5,054 universals. At that 7.0, there are 577 copies and 495 universals. Now, with the current price, 7.0 is going for about $1,950. If you look at the prices of this book from 2015 to 2020, it had a 21% annual return. Now, from what I've seen with a lot of these types of videos and analysis that I've done, is that seems a little outsized compared to what I'm used to seeing. So I thought there might be something there that is just overestimating what this book would do long term. So I also looked at what this book did prior to the MCU. That's the time frame I like to use as an alternative. So from 2003 to 2008, it had about a 7% annual return. So this gives me a range for the values of this book. So if I apply those returns to the value of this book in 2020, which is about $900, we get an estimate of $1,100 to $1,595. Now, the bad thing is that is well below where the price of this book is selling right now for both numbers. So it's somewhere between a 44% downside and an 18% downside. And I would speculate that it's somewhere in the middle there, but there is definitely quite a bit of downside risk to this book right now. This book, part of the problem, or what happened with it was it had a crazy high sale in June of 2021. There was a 9.8 that sold for $264,000. I remember when that book sold. That was one of the first times I remember seeing a sale and saying out loud, what is going on? This is when that insanity in the comic market really started to kick off. And this triggered this book. That sale triggered this book to really spike in price. And you had some really high sales. This book in a 7.0 had a peak sale of $4,250. It is currently down about 54% from that, and I think it still has quite a bit of room to drop. So I would be very cautious about Marvel Spotlight number 5 right now. To me, it just seems like there is a lot of downside risk with this book. All right, now on to number 3. We've got Amazing Spider-Man number 129, first appearance of the Punisher, another one of the more popular Marvel characters. Most common grade for this book is an 8.0, and the census count is just nuts. Just nuts for this one. You've got 16,844 total copies on census. 14,803 of those are universals. Just in the 8.0, you have 1,521 copies with 1,348 universals. There are a lot of these books graded out there. And again, that is because this book is worth quite a bit of money in any grade. So there's a lot of motivation to get it graded, whether it's a 2.0 or a 9.8. Now, the current price of an 8.0 is $2,050. It had a pre-boom annual return of 13%. So this book in June of 2020 was going for around $1,400. If you apply that return to it, you get about $2,020. So this one, that's only got a 1% downside risk. And there's enough estimation that's going on in here that there's effectively very little risk to this book right now. So to me, this one is a pretty safe book to pick up right now. You never know. Obviously, books can still go down in value, but the downside risk of Amazing Spider-Man number 129 seems very low at this point. Now, this book, just for another note, this book peaked in an 8.0 at $4,499. It is down 54% from there. Like I said, it looks like it is a pretty good place to be picking up this book, or at least if you've been waiting to pick one up, it does seem like it's at that point where your risk is quite a bit lower than it has been in the past. All right, so now let's move on to number 2. We've got Giant Size X-Men number 1, first appearance of the new X-Men. Most common grade for this one is a 7.0. Again, another book that has quite a few copies on the census. Not as many as Amazing Spider-Man 129, but quite a few. We've got 12,853 total copies with 11,569 universals. Just in the 7.0, we've got 1,078 with 979 of those being universal copies. Now, for a 7.0, the current price is about $3,100. I've actually seen the price of this book ticking up a little bit again. It had been down a little more, but there have been some recent sales that have been a little bit higher. Now, for this one, I also had to use a slightly different time frame. I had to use 2013 to 2018. Part of the reason is that there was a big spike in the price of this book. I believe it was right around when Marvel regained the rights for this. So that they would be able to make movies and everything, including the X-Men. And so that messed up the numbers a little bit, again, made things look like they had increased more than they actually had if you're looking at a long-term return. And so I used 2013 to 2018, where it had about a 14% return year over year. Now, in 2020, this book was going for about $1,700. If you apply that 14% return, it would be around a $2,500 book right now. So it does have a pretty big downside right now, about 19%. It did have a high sale of $6,188 in 2021. So it's down about 50%, but I do think this one still has some downside risk to it. So I would continue waiting on this book if you've been looking to pick one up. All right, now let's move on to number one, and then we're going to look at them all together and see which ones really look like those good buys and which ones are a lot more risky. So number one, I think no surprise, we've got Hulk number 181, first appearance of Wolverine. I'll say first full appearance, so I didn't get a bunch of people yelling at me in the comments. First full appearance of Wolverine on the cover, battling the Hulk, and just one of the most popular characters in the Marvel Universe, probably number two behind Spider-Man. Most common grade for this book is a 7.5. And again, a ton of copies of this one. I think this is the highest number of all the books I've talked about here. 17,016 copies on census, with 13,554 being universals. 1,447 7.5s alone, with 1,172 universal copies. Now, the current price for a 7.0 is about $5,150. It had a pre-boom annual return of 15. And this one suffered from the same type of issue. It had that spike with the X-Men property going back to Marvel. So I used 2012 to 2017 because it had a spike actually a little bit earlier, and it really kind of messed with the numbers. So this one had about a 15% annual return prior to that. And it was going for about $3,000 in 2020. We apply that and we get $4,550 as its estimated current value. That is a downside risk of just 12%, which really isn't too bad when you consider the fact that it has an annual return of 15%. If you have a downside within that number, it means if you bought it now in a year, you'd be about back to even. So definitely one that you could wait. You could wait and see what happens with it. I mean, prices can continue to drop. Or like I mentioned with one of the other books I talked about, if you find one for a good price, you find the right copy that you really like, it's not going to be too much risk at this point if you decide to pick one up. Now, in a 7.5, this book had a high sale of $10,200. So it is down 50% from that peak sale. But I just like talking about what some of those peak sales hit because it was just crazy. During 2021 and 2022, we had some really, really big numbers. All right, so now let's get into all these books combined and see which ones you might want to consider buying right now, which ones you want to put on that wait list or watch list, and which ones you want to avoid. So here we've got all of these books combined together. And don't worry, I know this can be a bit of an eye chart with everything together, but I will highlight certain ones that fall into those different categories. So let's start with the ones that are potential buys, and just two right now in the Bronze Age, meaning that a lot of these books still probably have a little bit of room to correct. And we've got Amazing Spider-Man number 129. This one is basically at the price that I estimated it should be going for. 8.0 going for right around $2,000. Annual return of 13%, just has a downside of 1% right now. So this is a book that I feel like has pretty low risk to it. The other one is that X-Men 101, current price $500 with the estimate of $570. So it actually has a 14% upside right now, a book that feels like it maybe overcorrected a little bit, and you might be able to pick it up at a good discount right now. Also has that 15% long-term return, so definitely one that I would be considering picking up if you have been waiting. Now, let's move on to the avoids. So I got it all in the red, you know. So these are the warning books, the books that I would steer clear of. Now, what I did with this is I picked anything where, based on the annual return, it would take more than a year to break even on that book. So we've got Giant Size X-Men #1, where it has a 19% downside, annual return of 14%. Marvel Spotlight #5, anywhere from a 44% downside to an 18% downside. The other risk there is that has just a 7% to 21% return. So a little bit lower return, big downside. I think that's a pretty risky book right now, has a decent ways that it could still drop. We've got Amazing Spider-Man #238. This one is right on the edge, 16% downside with a 14% return, but still, I think that's one that could still continue to correct. Might just want to wait a little bit. Then we've got Iron Fist 14. This one seems very risky right now. Just a 7% annual return and a potential downside risk of 25%. That's a few years before you would hit those numbers. So that is one that I would be very cautious about picking up right now. And the last one here, Batman 227. And it's hard for me to say because I really like this book, but based on what I see, that annual return of about 12%, downside risk of 33%, this book has just gotten really, really hot. And that always makes me nervous with the market that we're in right now. I want books to be closer to that long-term trend line, and this one is well above it. So these are the books that I would be avoiding right now. Now let's get to those watch books. So we've got 3 of them on here. First one, Hulk 181. These are ones where you should be able to get back to even within a year. And you can see here, Hulk 181 having about a 12% downside risk, but an annual return of 15%. So these are ones where if you find that great deal, it might be a good time to pick one up. At least your downside risk is relatively low. Next one here is Iron Man #55. You can see it has a little bit of a range there, but I really don't think that its long-term return is going to be 0. I do think it's going to be probably somewhere in that 0 to 10% range. So it has a possibility of some downside risk, but also has some upside potential as well. Plus, you've got the possibility that you have Star Fox play a major role or some type of role in the MCU in the future, which could be another catalyst for that book. So definitely one that I would be watching, and if you find one for the right price, might be a good time to consider picking it up. Last one here, House of Secrets 92, another book that has some potential with what might happen in the DC movie universe. It also has a pretty strong growth rate, especially for a DC book, 15%. It has a downside risk of just 13%. So again, another book that you would be back to even within a year if you picked it up at the current prices, assuming there's no like big financial collapse or anything like that. So there's always outside circumstances that could impact these numbers, but this is just based on the historical trends that I see with these books. So again, what are my conclusions from all of this? Similar to the last one, I like to mention this, that I think a lot of people take that all or nothing approach. It's either everything is good or everything is bad. And that's just not the case. You can see that here. Out of these 10 books, all major keys, you've got a couple that look like they've come back to their trend lines, that look like they're pretty good options to pick up. That Amazing Spider-Man 129 is very appealing because that's a major key. A lot of people want that. Plus, you've got X-Men 101. That is just, to me, one of the best covers of all time and just a great storyline behind it. Then you've got a bunch of books that I would say I would be avoiding right now. I mean, books that I think have a decent risk to the downside still. And so I would just wait and see what happens with them and see where those prices go longer term. Then you've got books that, depending on where the price goes on it, maybe you get a good auction or somebody's just motivated to sell, you might find it in that right range, that estimate that I have up there, and then it might be just a good time to buy it where your risk is pretty low. My point is that you don't have to just take a all or nothing approach. If you do some type of analysis like this, then you can look and see which ones are those books that have potential right now and which ones you should avoid. And remember to make sure to go check out Fanalytics on Instagram and sign up for their upcoming beta release. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that video. maybe got some information that's useful, help you pick up some of those big key issues that you're looking for, or avoid some right now and wait and see if the prices get better. Remember, if you want a chance to win this book, you've got to leave a comment with hashtag Fanalytics, like the video, subscribe, hit that notification bell, all that kind of stuff, and I will see you in the next video.